And this is a joint event today by the Ukraine Research Network at SOIS, funded by the German German Ministry of Science and Education, and the Center for Economic Strategy in Kyiv, and by SOIS, the Center for East European and International Studies. So I already said that we will record the presentation. My name is Sabine von Luis. I'm head of the research cluster Conflict Dynamics and Border Region here at SOIS, and also together with Gwendolyn Sasse coordinating a project on displaced Ukrainians in Poland, Germany, and Moldova. And the format will be the following. As I also already mentioned, Dariia will present for about 20 minutes, and then we will have Q&As after that. And we will ask you all to raise your hand, not so much use the chat, but directly ask your questions afterwards. And I will now also briefly present Dariia. So she is working or a fellow at the Center for Economic Strategy in Kyiv, and she's researching on human capital policy, and in particular, labor, mobility, and human capital development. And she has worked as a research assistant in the Department for Economics at the University of Warwick, and also worked with the Institute for Economic Affairs in London, and also with Fox Ukraine. Dariia holds a master's degree in economic policy from the University College of London, and a bachelor's degree in philosophy, politics, and economics, with an economics major from the University of Warwick, and she is also currently a PhD candidate in economics at the University of Bologna. And now the floor is yours, Dariia. You're welcome to start your presentation.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Just give me 1 second to share my screen. So hopefully you should be able to see my presentation right now. Okay, great. So today, as was said, I will present the report by Center for Economic Strategy on Ukrainian refugees or displaced Ukrainians, mainly focusing on those who are in Europe and also in Germany. But if you are interested to learn more details, you can go to the website of the Center for Economic Strategy to read the full version. It is available both in Ukrainian and in English, because today I will only have time to present some of the findings, and in the full report you will find much more. So let me see if I can, so the first question which we wanted to answer was how many Ukrainian refugees are there in Europe and in total? Because it may seem as quite straightforward questions, but there are many different data sources, and all the data sources kind of paint different pictures. I will not go into details about our methodology right now, but our calculations have shown that there are between 5.6 to 6.7 million of Ukrainians who remained abroad as of June 2023, and recently, as of the beginning of October 2023, additional around 100,000, 180,000 left. So we see that this number is slowly decreasing. Most of the refugees are either in Europe or in Russia and Belarus. So those who are in Russia and Belarus, many of them were also deported forcefully. So they're not really, all of them, not really refugees. Nevertheless, our estimates show that there are around 1.3 million of them in Russia and Belarus, and 1.2 million in Germany, and around 950,000 in Poland, which is kind of surprising because at the beginning of the Russian invasion, Poland had the most refugees, but it has changed, and I will discuss some of the reasons for this change later. Here you can see the plot, which shows kind of the number of people who left Ukraine and didn't return each month. And once again, you can show that the most highest number of people who left were in the beginning of invasion, and then it was kind of more or less stable. But on the whole, there were more people leaving than coming back in general. So just to give you a little bit of details about the characteristics of Ukrainian refugees, first of all, I will talk about some demographic characteristics. One important thing to note is that a lot of refugees are children. depending on data source you look at, between 25% and 51% of all refugees are children, which is a lot. And the second kind of highest group is women of middle age. So on the right here, you can see a plot of demographic distribution of Ukrainian refugees by gender and age. This is based on the official statistics of European Service of Statistics. And here you can see basically how the number of Ukrainian refugees in each group changed between August 2022 and March 2023. And you can see that while still, women are the biggest group, the group that has increased the most is men 18 to 34 and 35 to 64. Also talking about kind of Germany specifically, what is interesting is that Germany has the lowest share of children under 18 out of all countries we analyzed. So we only kind of analyzed it in depth the most popular countries with the refugees, such as Germany, Poland, Italy, Czech Republic, but also highest share of adults 50 years plus. Again, I will discuss kind of some potential reasons for this later, but this is just an interesting fact. Another important characteristics of refugees relates to their kind of quality of life and the income they have. We can see that many refugees have lost a lot of income since the invasion. So this plot is based on our survey, and we asked them about their income before the war and during the first wave of the survey, which was in November 2022, and the second wave, which is in May 2023. And we see that their income has decreased significantly between the beginning of the war and first wave. So you see that only a small proportion couldn't afford food or clothing before the war, but now, or at least at the November last year, it has increased to like more than 30%, and it stayed kind of relatively stable, even though it has decreased a little. Another important thing is the geographic distribution of refugees, and we see that it is also not very unbalanced, and in some regions a very, very significant proportion of population has left the region. So for example, in such regions as Zaporizhzhia, Kyiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, and Kherson region, almost a quarter to 1/5 of population has left, unfortunately, due to the Russian invasion. As a part of our research, we have also performed cluster analysis to kind of distinguish between main groups of refugees. And again, here we'll very briefly describe those, but you can read more in the full report. And in this group, we distinguish classic refugees, we call them, which are kind of mainly women with children who were not really prepared to go abroad, and who were not planning to migrate abroad, but they were forced to due to the security situation, and they kind of remain very unadapted to life abroad. For example, many of them cannot really, take language courses or work because they have to look after small children. And this kind of makes them really unadapted. The second group, we call them quasi-labor migrants. And we call them because for them, the kind of security situation wasn't the only reason to leave Ukraine. They also wanted to find a work and work abroad, even though security was also very important for them, as it was for everyone, obviously. And to this group, they were more adapted to life abroad. Many of them have already worked or at least been abroad before, and many of them had friends abroad or knew the language, so they were kind of more adapted and more willing to find the job. The third group, we'll call them professionals. So these are people who were more likely to find, who are more willing to only be willing to work in their field of expertise. So either they work kind of in their area of expertise, so they don't work at all. And they also kind of have relatively more comfortable standard of living abroad, because many of them kind of migrated to the people they already know. So they stay with their friends, with their family members who were already living in Europe before the invasion. So they're kind of more comfortable in that way. And the last group, but obviously not the least, is people from the war zone. These people have unfortunately suffered the most from the war, so they have kind of lost everything. And even though they were not really adapted to life abroad before the war, they were forced to adapt very quickly, and they're willing to do so because they kind of need the income to have something to live on. And this group is also most likely to stay in Germany compared to other groups. So in the previous slides, I've kind of, hinted that there are some reasons why particular groups of people may be more willing to live in Germany. And in my opinion, kind of this is one of the main reasons why, is because of the difference in policy towards assistance to Ukrainians. So many countries we know have already reduced or plan to reduce benefits that are paid to Ukrainians. But at least at the time of the survey, the Germany was a very stark exception. For example, in Poland, 56% of the refugees received benefits as of May, but in Germany, 74% received it. And the type of benefits that received were also different. So in Poland, it was mainly like child assistance benefits, while in Germany, it was kind of unemployment benefits, which were larger and there were more enough to live on. So, for example, in this plot, you can see basically the question which was asked of respondents, whether the benefits they receive is enough for them. And you can see the contrast between Poland and Germany, where in Poland, like 62% say that the benefit they receive is not enough for their basic needs. But in Germany, most kind of people say that it's enough for basic needs, and some even say that it's enough to afford everything, while for other countries, they are kind of somewhere in between. We can also see some interesting other tendencies. So some countries such as Ireland, Switzerland, and Norway have introduced payments for Ukrainians to return to Ukraine. So this is basically kind of incentivizing them to come back. And we also see that with time, kind of the dynamics is different in different countries. In Poland, the percentage of people who do not have enough for their basic needs have increased, while in Germany it's decreased. So we see the opposite tendencies in different countries. It is also important that if people do not receive benefits, many of them kind of start working, obviously, and even if they do receive benefits, they still start working. And we also see this, tendency difference here. So, for example, if we compare Poland and Germany, once again, in Poland, around 50% of people work either full-time or part-time, while in Germany, only like 20%. Excuse me. And other countries are somewhere in between. And even though this percentage has increased since the first wave of the survey, again, this is also dependent on the policies that different countries adopt. So kind of Germany has adopted more long-term adaptation strategy, where they kind of incentivize people to first take language courses, integration courses, and so on, while Poland kind of incentivizes people to immediately start looking for a job once they arrive in Poland. Another important thing is that most Ukrainian refugees have very high level of education. 63% of them have higher education, and this is high both compared to previous waves of refugees in Europe from Syria, Afghanistan, for example, and as well it's also high compared to Ukrainian population overall. So we can see that kind of there is a brain drain happening of Ukrainians with higher education, unfortunately migration, which can have a big problem in the future. And yeah, many people are also kind of prepared to take further steps and take additional qualifications to work in the future. And those who work also, what is important, many of them work in their field of expertise. And excuse me. Many of them work in their field of expertise, even though it's only like 34%. It's still considered high because with migration, it is often kind of expected that people initially work below their expertise while they earn additional skills, or learn language, and then they will be able to work in their previous occupation. So the most important question we have to ask and to answer is whether the Ukrainian refugees will return after the war. As of now, as of May 2023, we see that 41% plan to return and 22% said that they rather planned than not planned. Even though it's relatively high, it's above the half. This has decreased slightly since the first wave, where it was more than like around 50% who plan to return for sure, and 24% who would rather plan to return. And also even those who still plan to return, many of them have postponed their return around a quarter, mainly due to them kind of underestimating the duration of war. And what is also kind of not surprising, but distinguished is that among the children, the intentions to return is even lower, which means that some children can stay and, for example, pursue higher education abroad, even if their parents return home. Also, we see that 58% of those who plan to return intend to do so only after the end of the war. And the safety factors and ability to find a good job are most important factors contributing to the return, once again, according to the survey. We also ran like a very, very basic regression. Again, this is not really causal factors, it's just to see which factors are correlated with intentions to return of refugees. And we see that there are some interesting results. We see that students and people who are unemployed are less willing to return compared to people who are not actively looking for a job. So here by unemployed, we mean people who are not employed but are actively looking for a job. And this is kind of explained because, you know, people who are already either studying, so they kind of have this connection to the country, or they're like actively looking for a job, so they're kind of want to work there and they want to stay there. They would probably also be more willing to stay there in the long run. Also, geographically, people from central Ukraine are least willing to return. And also what is interesting is that people who had high income before the war are more willing to return, but while people who currently have high income abroad are less willing to return. And again, this is kind of self-explanatory, I guess, because people who had better economic situation at home would like to go back home to that better economic situation, and people who are able to kind of make better income where they are would more likely to stay there. We also tried to calculate how many people will return and how many people will remain abroad. And according to our calculations, between 2 and 3 million will return, and 1.3 to 3.3 million will remain abroad. And this really is kind of large interval because it depends on the scenario, and there are so many different unknowns that it's very difficult to say for sure. But we also calculated how much the Ukrainian economy can lose from that. And in our estimates, Ukrainian economy could lose annually between 2.7 and 6.9% of GDP due to non-return of refugees, which is a really, really large number. And also what is kind of particularly important is that large number of people who are abroad are children, as you can see here. So here is Ukrainian demographic pyramid, and the in like dotted areas show the difference between the number of people who were in that category before the war and after, basically as of start of 2023, so after the kind of the large refugee wave. So we can see that in the lowest age group, so the children age groups, almost half of all of the children have migrated abroad, which is really, really large number. And if they don't return, it can have very significant demographic consequences as well. So just to conclude, we also have some kind of recommendations on what the EU countries and Ukraine should do together after the war to both ensure the well-being of refugees, but also to kind of incentivize them to return back to Ukraine in better circumstances and to kind of to have good standard of living. So we think Ukraine should cooperate with the EU, both in kind of establishing these schemes of return refugees after the war, but also you can contribute with their experience, for example, with training programs and requalification programs, so that Ukrainian refugees can have better job, which is what many of them want and what many of them say is an important factor for them to return to Ukraine. The post-war reconstruction is also very important, and while it is going, the Ukrainian government, or maybe assisted with the EU, should provide people with assistance to find a job, to find a house to live in safer regions. This can also be done via public-private mechanisms. For example, when a company gives a person a job and the government kind of helps them with housing. And also the education of children is very important. So children who have studied in the foreign schools before their kind of return to Ukrainian education systems should be simplified, both to schools and to universities. For Ukrainians who kind of still staying abroad, it's important to kind of increase communication with them, both to incentivize them to cooperate with Ukrainian companies and businesses so that they do not lose this connection with Ukraine, but also to kind of explain them how can they return in the future. And finally, after the war, hopefully Ukraine will join the EU, and kind of one of the preconditions of that is opening EU labor market for Ukrainians and vice versa. And this can also actually have an effect of helping Ukrainians to return to Ukraine, because that would mean that they would know that they would be able to go back to the EU at any point in time. So they wouldn't need to kind of stay in the EU just to keep their residence permits, because they would be able to, kind of go back home and see if they like it or not. And if they don't, they will be able to go home. So it will can incentivize this return as well. So yeah, thank you a lot for your attention. This is all I have time for today. But again, if you're interested in more, feel free to go to the website of Center for Economic Strategy for the full version.
Okay, thank you very much, Dariia, for this keeping the time and to give as much information as you could for the short time